So we've seen landlords exit the market in big numbers. We've seen first-time buyers struggling with limited stock, as you touched on, and we've seen rents rising to historic highs. So the big question is, how do we encourage responsible investment into the private rental sector at a time when legislation feels quite restrictive, even though we know it's needed? You've voiced that beautifully.
Yeah.
So how do we encourage people into this sector?
So one thing I think should be banned is finfluencers.
Oh, wow. Oh, there's your hook right there for a social media post.
Ban the influencer.
Why is that?
But only around the private rental sector, because what you find is you've got people saying, you can make millions, just buy these properties, rent them out. Yeah, and it's just nonsense.
Yeah.
You do not make millions. Historically, maybe you would have made a reasonable level of income from renting out properties. Now, this is about whether or not you want to make an income over a period of time, or whether you want to get capital appreciation over a similar period of time.
Yeah.
And that's what you're weighing up. So you might find that yields, particularly in the north, the yields are pretty high, and you could get in excess of 11% gross yield. So very, very high within certain pockets of the north. But then you kind of think, are we going to hit saturation point? Because every landlord in the south is now buying in the north.
Yeah.
Every landlord in Scotland is buying in the north of England. So, you get that bubble.
Yes.
Will it burst? Who knows? There's still, again, supply-demand mismatch. So, maybe for the foreseeable, we should be okay with that.
Okay.
You can still make a reasonable yield in certain areas of the south. London maybe less so. You're probably looking at 2 or 3% gross yield. So it's a big gamble.
Yeah.
And so that's why you're seeing lots of properties staying on the market for a lot longer. However, if you want to gamble against capital appreciation, the chances are the only place you're going to get that level of capital appreciation will be in the south. So there is still money to be made from property. And of course, with properties, if the property prices go up and down, they don't tend to go up and down that often, not for very long either. Whereas if you're gambling on the stocks and shares market, then at the moment in particular, there is a lot of volatility. So I think if you are a landlord, you know what you're doing, you've got your own workforce, you've got a letting agent in situ, and you are merely adding properties to your portfolio, it still works really well. If you are a new landlord coming to the market, then you're going to really think twice about how you go about doing that. And then you have to start thinking about, do you want yield or do you want capital appreciation, and then take it from there. So when I see these finfluencers that talk about, come and, we'll find you your property, just pay us £2,000 and we'll do all of that. I just think we need to be really careful with people like that. And a degree of regulation might be helpful.
Yes, I was going to say, and there is so many of them. There's such big influences out there. They have millions of followers and people that will just subscribe
naively assuming that what they say is right. And I'm afraid for the most part, it probably isn't.
Well, I know there's been a documentary recently which touches on it that's had a lot of exposure, so I imagine there'll be more where that came from.
Hopefully.
So what would a balanced, sustainable private rental sector look like in your eyes?
Do you know what I'd really love to see? I'd really love to see a holistic view of the housing market. So we talk a lot about first-time buyers, and I'm a big advocate of first-time buyers getting onto the housing market. Absolutely right. The right thing to do. House movers, again, we see a number of house movers. We don't see much movement at the latter part of your lending life, should we say. So some of the older borrowers. And so I think what we need to do is go, every single tenure has its place. And how do we make sure that we look at everything holistically and complementary? So when you look at the private rental sector, not everybody is going to either want to buy a house, because they might decide that they want to change jobs every 12 months. Yeah. They want to be able to move around, so that's a very transient environment or very transient world that we live in. They might never be able to buy a house. They might just have always lived in rented accommodation throughout their whole life and have zero aspiration to buy a house. That's okay. Yeah. And then you've got the social housing sector that needs to be stimulated. It needs to grow in order to support some of the people that don't want to or can't even get into the private rental sector. Yeah. We've got a homeless challenge here within the UK. How do we then best house those individuals? What do we do about that? So looking at that holistically, and then looking at the whole of that journey. So how do you go from being a renter to potentially towards the end of your living life, you become a renter again? How do we make sure that we marry up all of those different tenures in order to make sure that everybody gets the opportunity to live in a safe, comfortable home that they either call their own or is somebody else's that they call their own. So I just think we just need to think about that. Legislation needs to be effective, but not stand in the way of innovation. And I think just at the moment, that's possibly what's happening. And the only innovation that we are seeing, and it's minute, as you will know, is probably around first-time buyers.
Yeah. We are seeing, I have to say, we are seeing innovation there, aren't we? And rent taken into account. But like you say, that's only good if you're looking at the whole thing around it, because then the next problem will just ripple.
Of course it will. We're not giving birth to as many children. The population, we're not growing our own population, which is why we have to have migrants coming into the country and invite people in to help to stimulate the economy. We're not doing that ourselves. We're living longer. And so all of these things just have to be taken into account. So how do we make sure that we've got a healthy housing world that accounts for everybody's needs?
You make such good points. What needs to change then from government or lenders or industry to truly support both tenants and the next generation of first-time buyers and the next generation or the existing generation of landlords?
Absolutely. So it feels like, and I've worked within the private rental sector in various different roles, always for lenders. It feels like we've demonised the private rental sector for such a long time. And I can see that there are rogue landlords. I'm not going to suggest for 1 minute that there are no rogue landlords. There are.
Yeah.
If you look at the whole of the private rental sector, only 40% of it has mortgages. Okay. So the other 60% is unencumbered. Now, I'd be tempted to think that that's probably what's housing the rogue landlords, albeit there are so few of them. 80% of all tenants would suggest that they're really happy with their home and they're happy with their landlord. So we don't have a huge problem. So stop demonising a perfectly acceptable tenure within the housing agenda. Stop demonising it and start to think about how we innovate, how we support, how we promote. Maybe we need to start thinking about, when we're looking at the new legislation around improving the sustainability of the stock, how do we go about helping the landlords to do that, whether that be financially or, tactically through helping with tradespeople, various things like that. What can we do slightly differently? So I think it's just thinking outside the box. Instead of just stamping demon on all of these landlords, how do we try and access them, the right landlords, to do the right thing for the right people to have a safe home? Yes. And then I think that then triggers all of your, as I say, working at it holistically, you've then got a first-time buyer who's had a great experience and thinks, right, I want to do that. Or, my new home is going to be really important to me because I've just had my old home. Yeah. And then actually that first-time buyer that's moving into the next home might think, I'm just going to leave that property behind and I'm going to rent that property out because I know how to behave as a landlord. Yes. So you kind of think, how do we manage to do that instead of demonising everybody within the private rental sector and beyond? Yeah. How do we start to stimulate it through innovation or just acknowledgement that actually it is a really strong tenure?
I love that. And one thing we haven't touched on, which you touched on, was, you call it Me's. So can we talk about that? Because we haven't got that in the script, but it seems important to add context.
It's here. So these are the improving the EPC standards within the private rental sector. So last year, 2025, the government launched 2 consultations. One was around EPC reform and the other one was around EPC standards. So EPC reform is, do the current EPCs work? Are they fit for purpose? Do we need to think about whether or not we do something different with the new EPCs? I don't think anybody would disagree with that because they're kind of a little bit hit and miss, and you might get a good EPC and you might get another different EPC provider that gives you a different EPC on the same property. I think we've got that. There is definitely some improvements to be made through that. So that was the first consultation which closed, and then the second consultation was around EPC standards. So this is landlords improving the standards of their properties to get their EPCs up to an A to C rated EPC. So they were both running pretty concurrently. But what's now happened is the EPC reform. So this is the bit about what does an EPC look like. That has now been, the output of that has been postponed to 2027.
Okay.
So another 18 months or so before the end of 2027. But in the meantime, the EPC standards, so this is the piece where all landlords need to improve their properties to an A to C rated EPC. That one's been signed off, and then that one kicks in October 2030.
Right.
So we don't know what an EPC is going to look like until 2027, but we're then going to have to enact on it by October 2030 to get all those properties. So in reality, 50% of the private rental sector falls outside of an EPC A to C.
It's hard to be at A to C.
It's really hard to be an A to C. Now, what the government have said is that there are going to be some exemptions, so that's helpful.
Okay.
The landlord will only have to spend a maximum of £10,000. If the property needs more work than that, then it will be exempt. So they'll spend the first £10,000 and then it's outside of. And if we've got a property, so for example, a property in the northwest that might be worth £60,000, then clearly you're not going to spend £10,000 on it to upgrade it. So it'll be percentage based. So it just will be reasonable. The first thing that they need to do is to do kind of fabric first. So make sure that the roof doesn't leak, the windows don't leak, make sure they've got the right light bulbs, etc. So getting to that EPC A to C, if it was just fabric first, then that feels like it's okay. And we've got to October 2030. But if you look at the number of properties that are going to need to be upgraded,
so many.
It's a phenomenal number. It works out about 1,500 properties per day, every day between now and 2030.
Wait, can we put 1,500 properties a day?
Every day.
From now till then?
Yeah, and of course that number's going to grow.
Improved.
Yeah, that number's going to grow because of course we're not doing it yet because we don't know
waiting for the legislation.
We don't know what the legislation is going to do in 2027. So another good thing that the government have done is that they have said if you have a valid EPC now that's A to C, that is valid, the property's okay, then the EPC will be valid for 10 years.
Okay.
So if we get an EPC now, on today's legislation, then that'll be valid for 10 years. So for me, that's a big opportunity for landlords to go out and either just upgrade your EPC, do whatever work you need to do now, just to make sure that you're absolutely in line. If you fall way outside of the EPC A to C, then you are going to have to spend some money on this property, which then might mean that the landlord goes, I've been hit by taxation, I've been hit by higher interest rates, you've just thrown the Renters' Rights Act at me, and now you want me to spend £10,000 on a property that's probably not going to be worth it for me. So I'm likely to want to sell it. So they either probably have to sell it undervalued to another landlord that's willing to spend the £10,000 to upgrade this property, or it goes into the first-time buyer market. Great outcome. However, all we're doing is shifting the problem from one tenure to another tenure because, of course, we're not looking at owner-occupied properties yet in relation to improving the sustainability. So you kind of go, yes, it feels like the right thing to do. And yes, there's some work that needs to be done within the private rental sector, which actually performs better than the owner-occupied sector when it comes to EPCs. But we'll focus on that and hopefully we'll drive forward some improvements. So this is going to come into force by October 2030.
Okay.
So you can see there are some compounding challenges for landlords.
When you put it like that, you can.
So going back to your earlier point about what do we need to do to try and stimulate the market is just kind of leave us alone for a little while. And let us do it. Enough's enough kind of thing. So, but ultimately, and I go back to my earlier point, I'm really passionate about tenants having good quality homes that are safe.
Yeah.
That should be the most important thing. And so how do we make sure that we do that, but without going to the nth degree around legislation, which is where we probably are just about to embark upon. And if we haven't got enough tradespeople to build the houses that we're trying to build, new homes are 1.5 million new homes, which we're likely to fall short, I think, of that target, then we haven't got enough tradespeople to improve the properties.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because they're building.
Because they're building the new homes.
Which means you then need to look at that trade area of the market and how do you stimulate that? How do you entice people into that area?
And of course, there's some great initiatives around apprenticeship schemes, etc. But they are not going to be in time for the deadlines that have been set.
No.
You're not going to have all of those people.
This is the future generation, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I do think with AI as well, there are more emphasis on trades being a very lucrative career.
It's got to be, hasn't it?
You use your hands. That a machine can't do that bit for
no,
you. Yeah,
exactly.
So,
exactly.
Who knows, but it's going to take more time, like you say.
It's going to take more time. We are going to miss that deadline. And then, of course, then there's some really, significant fines that will be put in place should a landlord miss that deadline. So I am fearful that we're not going to be able to achieve the target that's been set by the government. And I think there's probably a little bit of a sense check that needs to be had. And actually, within the Labour Party manifesto, they said we will improve properties within the private rental sector by 2030. They didn't suggest exactly what they would do. And so this kind of feels like it's a little bit too much to achieve in what is quite a short period.
And my last question is for landlords. Is there anything we can say in a short bite-sized chunk to still entice them or reassure them? Anything positive that we can give them? Because I know you're passionate about keeping landlords here.
Yeah.
So is there anything we can summarise to say, stay here?
Stay here.
Don't
so
leave.
20% of the population needs to rent. 20%. That's huge. And we've got a supply-demand mismatch. So if you say 15 people for every new property, there is still some real need for the private rental sector. There are some strong yields in particular parts of the private rental sector. And actually, do you know what? It's just a really good thing to help house people that can't get on the housing ladder.
Louisa, thank you. This has been incredibly enlightening. And I think for people watching, hopefully first-time buyers, maybe even landlords or people that want to be landlords, I think what you've done is broken down an incredibly complex topic and made it sound simple and educational all at the same time. So thank you for your honesty and your experience and everything that you do for this sector in the industry. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
And to everyone listening, if this conversation helped you, please share this episode with someone who needs to understand the private rental sector, the Renters' Rights Act, or some more steps in the real journey to buying their first home. And most importantly, if you've got any questions that you want to ask while watching this episode, please put them in the comments and I will come back to you. This is Sarah Tucker and I will see you in the next episode.